Hey everyone, welcome to Love, Rinse, Repeat, a podcast recorded on the unceded sovereign lands of the Gayo-Mago people by me, Liam Miller, he, him, his, a minister in the Uniting Church in Australia. Joining me today is Sione Havea. Sione, welcome along.
Thank you, Liam. Thank you.
So for those who don't know, Sione is a native Methodist pastor from Tonga and research fellow with Trinity Methodist College in Aotearoa, New Zealand, with Public and Contextual Theology Research Centre at Sturt University. He also teaches, just recently taught a course at United Theological College, and I know you're teaching a class later this year at Pilgrim. But Sione is also the author and editor of a whole lot of books. And today we're going to be discussing a recent release, which is this one here, Losing Ground, Reading Ruth in the Pacific, which is out now through SCM Press. And you're going to hear why you should pick it up, but you could even just trust me now and just go and do it before you hear another word. But Sione, before we get to that book, you know, I was thinking about, like, every other day or every other month on Facebook, I see a new edited volume come out with your name and sometimes your name and a collaborator attached. Some recent ones people who might be interested is Bible Blind Spots, Intersectionality and Theology, which you edited with previous guest on the podcast, Monica Melanchthon. There's also Mission and Context, People and Land, Doing Theology in the New Normal, Theological and Hermeneutical Explorations from Australia, Jonah and Earth Bible Commentary, Post-Colonial Voices from Down Under. I could list on and on. And a lot of these are edited volume, and then there are a few solo authored works as well. I'm curious about, like, you know, what I guess kind of both drives or maybe unifies or somewhat connects the kind of what interests you in these different projects, both in terms of like the kind of the content and the questions that you're trying to wrestle with, and I guess also with the form and the way you're trying to go about them, particularly with, you know, so many being edited volumes. You know, so I'm curious about kind of, yeah, do you feel like as a theologian, biblical scholar, there's, you know, something that really is like holding a lot of this together, this, you know, prolific kind of organized output?
Thank you, Liam. First of all, let me pay my respects. I'm có cái hú phang ngay vào tập của tôi bé, cái phone one, cái mà ai cao khi ở phone one, cái cao cái cái ở phone one, phải tu con của cái của hú phang ngay vào tập của tôi bé. There are several things, and thanks for getting me on this. In your event, I use the word event for a lot of things. There are a few things that I'm committed to. One is to bring the native voices. So a lot of the things I do involve bringing voices that don't always get this opportunity to get their insights, their wisdom shared. It's not, I'm not assuming that I'm doing them a favor. It's that they are doing us, people who are in theology and biblical studies, they are doing us a favor in sharing their insights. A lot of, one of my other commitments is in all of the collections that I edit or co-edit, I make space for student voices. So I don't publish a collection without a contribution from someone who is a student at the time of publication.
Yeah.
I try, when I say native, I look into the region, Oceania, Pasifika, but also into Indigenous Australia as well. So there is a lot of wisdom by quote unquote native people that can help us see things differently theologically. I'm also committed. I don't use the label post-colonial on myself. For myself, I don't see myself as a post-colonial or decolonial or whatever you call it. But I'm committed into engaging or allowing or inviting or creating a platform where people can engage with post-colonial and decolonial voices. And post-colonial and decolonial voices come from both natives and non-natives. So it's not just it's not just the privilege of colored folk to be post-colonial. So those are commitments that come through. But the other side of my work, Liam, is because is trying to draw attention to what happens down under, down our way, because these publications take place in the Northern Hemisphere, in the American European context.
Yeah.
So it's an opportunity to draw the attention of the people from up north to what happens down south. And all of that is behind all of that is just having a go at pushing back at this European form of academic scholarship. So whether you call that colonial, post-colonial or whatever, it's just pushing back at the masters who control both the tools and the houses of theology. So those are the kind of things that I try to do successfully in some places, not so successfully in other places, but yeah. Is that helpful to get us?
Very, yes. I think that's really helpful. I think that last point particularly kind of leads well into talking about this book. So this book is, you've got kind of a couple of early chapters where you're kind of laying out the context and the intent of the book, and you're kind of looking at a bit of Ruth and its place in the canon, and we'll explore a bit of that later. But then the bulk of the book is really made up of these Bible studies that you undertook and have kind of formed into these kind of chapters that people can read and then use in their own Bible studies or in their own personal studies. So maybe just talk to us a bit about the production of this book, like how you went about pulling it together, the nature of those Bible studies, those talanoa conversations, and how they, what that was like for you going into that.
Yeah. So what I did was go around and did Bible studies in different places. In Australia, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and in the islands. So what I learned from the participants in the Bible studies, I used those to write up the collection of Bible studies in this. So what ended up in the book is probably maybe around 10% of what I learned from the communities. Their sense of humor, their tradition, the overlaps between this community, like in the Solomon Islands and Fiji, the overlap between Nauru and Kiribati. So I went to learn how they read and how they read Ruth.
Yeah.
And I used that to form the collection of Bible studies. What I was pushing back at is the assumption in biblical scholarship, in the academy, that people who know Hebrew and who learn all these methods, historical criticism, literary criticism, they are the ones who do biblical studies. And the people who do Bible studies are just people in the churches. And the assumption is that the biblical studies people are the critical, the wise ones. And the Bible study people are not very critical. Yeah, but what I learned and try to show in this collection of Bible studies is that, the Bible studies people, they don't read Hebrew, but they are very critical of the biblical text. So it's a pushing back also at the academy to assume that, what I call the commentary business, that to know the truth, whatever that is, about a biblical text, you have to read, works done in biblical studies mode. And Bible studies is just, kind of flaky, very, very folk. But as you know, some of our people are very critical. It's just that they don't have that permission to be critical. So that was part of what's behind this particular project.
I think what was so helpful in reading that too was there's sometimes this, and maybe it's getting a bit less prevalent as an attitude, but this thing of ministers or theologians go and learn a bunch of stuff, and you get to your church and you go, better not actually talk about any of that, because like these are simple folk, and I don't want to like disrupt their nice, naive, pleasant relationship with the Bible. But what you see through these conversations is a critical or a careful reading that's willing to ask good questions or propose provocative readings that really are wrestling with, well, but this is what life is like, so we can't just like accept this at like, this kind of face value. So I think that was a really helpful thing that, should be permission giving, but also again disrupts that kind of narrative of this kind of
Yes, and with the narrative like Ruth, this thing about sex.
Yes,
with some of us think that, they're regular folk, they can't handle this thing about sex, and in all of the communities that I went, they are eager to talk about sex, and they are more critical, more playful, are very playful. I mean, I don't know if it ended up in the book, but in one of the Maori communities in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I was trying to tiptoe into getting, to get to the point where I wanted them to explain if they understood Boaz and Ruth having sex. Was it possible that they had sex in the threshing floor? And one old woman just said, "Oh, get over it. That kind of thing happens."
Yeah.
so I came with this assumption. Oh, they're old women. They don't talk about sex. but it's no drama for them. And I think that's the thing that we, I'm a pastor. We people who work for the church need to realize that the people out there in the congregation, they are real humans, with all of these full range of emotions, and they read biblical text with that emotion. And it's only, we just need to realize that, they read with their bodies, and we need to see that as well. So.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it is just this like frankness. Well, of course, yes. Like we're not.
So what's the big deal? No.
Yeah.
What's the big...
Totally. So I guess one of the questions right at the foundation also is what led you to choose Ruth? Now you kind of talk. I guess like the book opens with the acknowledgement of Ruth begins with migration, which is a very prominent experience in the Pacific and elsewhere, and particularly with the increasing climate emergency. So that might have been the main reason, but did you consider other texts, or were you kind of early on was like Ruth is going to be particularly poignant and helpful, or was it just because it's kind of short?
No, that's it. It's because it was short, and I could run a series of Bible studies in a week or two. Because the mission body that supported this project, the Council for World Mission, I had to sell the idea that I was going to help them do contextual Bible study, so that the mission body could support my project. And Ruth was short enough, and I think I know Ruth a little well, that I could go and because when I went to these communities, I only took my Bible with me. I didn't take books to help me remember things. So I was fairly familiar with the narrative, and I had done several works on Ruth. So I thought I was on top of Ruth, and that's why I went with Ruth as my companion to these communities. So and it's also a book that I suspected that these communities would have a good feel for, and they can quickly read.
Yes. And I guess it's like, is this, it is a kind of the narrative is kind of has these kind of neat 4 like chapters. I mean, both in the biblical sense, but also in the sense that we use chapters in a novel, right? Go, return, meet a character, have a need, it's addressed. So one thing I'm interested in talk about a little bit is you kind of write in one of the introductory chapters, you talk about Ruth's placement within the canons. So, and its different placement within the Hebrew Bible and Christian Old Testament, and how those kind of readings open up a different way of reading it. And you particularly kind of talk about, you know, its placement and kind of within the wisdom, and, you know, its proximity to Song of Songs in the Hebrew Bible, brings something different than where it's placed in the kind of historical narrative arc of we're getting to a king in the Christians Old Testament. So can you talk to us a bit about that? Because I think that's something that a lot of folk wouldn't have thought about and might help open up the text in a different way as we sit to read it.
Yeah. So if people would read the Bible, whether it's a Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament, in the order in which they come, the placement of Ruth should affect how they read Ruth. Like you said, in the Hebrew Bible, it's next to Song of Songs. And you know, you read Ruth and Song of Songs, there's central elements there. In the Old Testament, it's next to the Book of Judges. The Book of Judges is quite bloody, violent, and then gets to the king. So you read the narrative there. It's different.
Yeah.
But what works for me as a biblical critic is that the fact that this same narrative is located at two different places is telling me that, you know, you can't pin Ruth down. Yeah, it's the book itself is mobile. It can move between places, and so your reading of Ruth cannot be, you cannot just say, oh, this is what Ruth means. You know, it means something different. Means something different in the Hebrew Bible, something different in the Old Testament. Similarly, it means something different in Nauru, something different in Fiji, something different in Mauhinui. So just the placement and the I say fluidity, the fluidity of the biblical text, and give us, I say permission, gives us permission to allow the narrative to float, or flow from one place to another. So I didn't expect at the beginning that I'll end up with so many. I had to trim it down so that it's manageable. I mean, with 20 Bible studies, I didn't expect it to. I didn't expect to end up with a thick volume, but it ended up being a very thick volume, and that's credit to these different communities. But coming back to, I mean, there are a lot of people who use this phrase, oh, the text in its final form. Yeah, actually, Ruth doesn't have a final form, because it has two final forms. It's different in the Hebrew Bible, different in the Old Testament, and because it has two final forms, it invites us to wrestle, to whatever the right word is, to embrace Ruth again and again and again. So,
I really like that. So the book is called Losing Ground, and at a bit of point in the early on page 31, you have this bit where you talk about the colonial project confiscated more than islands and resources. It also took, whitewashed native minds and practices. And then going down, put another way, losing ground took place at two interconnected platforms. At the material and physical world, we lost our roots. At the intellectual and spiritual level, we lost our routes. And the colonial project is ongoing. And so then you have this talanoa event advocated herein in the book, works against the colonial project of unification and oneness. Now you kind of already were hinting at that there, and that this not one final form, but I guess talk to us a bit about this losing ground, and you know, and I guess the manifold way that's kind of playing in the text and the conversations.
Yeah, thanks for that. I owe the title to my commissioning editor. I mean, David Shervington is the one that came up with the title, and it worked in different contexts. It made sense because there's a climate change element. Yeah, we are losing ground. It also made sense for migrant communities. We're losing ground in the sense that, like, you know, Tongans, I'm Tongan, so Tongans in Australia have losing ground. We've lost our ground back in the island. January 15, was it the 15th? There was that tsunami, so there's losing ground that's ongoing. But there's also ideological elements of losing ground. And ground here is, physical, it's ideological. And the narrative itself is about, well, the collection of Bible studies shows how people were just, almost every character was losing ground in some form. Including the husbands and the sons who died, that their death was a losing ground as well. So losing ground was just and I found out later, I think it's a TV show in the UK.
Right.
So whether that's where David got the title from or not, but it just works because and the image on the cover, it's that shows that climate change element.
Yes.
So the work, and I think this is an element that I didn't quite push hard enough in the work, but that we lost grounds to the colonial project. But when we read biblical texts as natives, the colonial project is losing its grounds. So that second element, I don't think was strong enough. But you know how it goes. This is this is for losing ground number 2 or something like that. But I think that's my colleague Brian Collier was reading. I'm going to misquote this, but an indigenous person from up north had said on Twitter that the I think I wrote it somewhere. Oh, here it is. My favorite beverage is the tears of colonizers who are mad that we exist. So this is Ash Dahlstrom. Sorry if I'm going to mispronounce it. But that's the second side of losing ground, that we need to realize that the colonizers do not have the control. And when their pain in losing their grounds is the joy for us natives.
There's a quote I really liked where you've been talking about your grandfather, and then you go, this book comes in my grandfather's spirit, seeking to make, quote, any notions of white superiority absurd. And it was interesting thinking about that both as a great aim of a book, but also, your placement of that as this is something that comes from a lineage, in the sense that it's not like a kind of post-colonial or 21st century project to push against white superiority and racism. That's kind of this native way of protesting that's been there, that has its own history here, not one that needs to come from elsewhere. That I thought
precisely. And my grandfather died in 1942, so this was when this former principal of the college where my grandfather was working, that was his tribute. It was an Australian, actually, a white Australian, who said, this guy didn't let me off the hook. So I'm people think, oh, we are so radical now, in 20 whatever. I say we're not radical enough. This is what happened in the 1940s or before 1942. We still have to make up grounds on showing, that white supremacy is something that we can push back at. So it's and I'm named after my grandfather, so that's why it works in this particular. He's probably turning in his grave.
So what happened?
But that's his problem.
So I'm curious if there's a point where you talk about with talanoa that it's a process that opens up, right? It's not a closing at the end. It's this opening. And so I guess if you think about as, having done this project and, a book being published kind of has this sense of finality and you can move on to something else. But I guess for you, do you have particular things that you felt have been opened up in this, that if you come to preach or teach or write on Ruth again, will be lingering in a way they maybe weren't before.
I like that, write on Ruth again. I'll return again and again to write on Ruth. And it depends on how you spell that right, eh?
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that I got Ruth figured out. So one of the benefits of doing this is just opening it up again. I've edited a project, or co-edited a project on Ruth, and written a fair bit. So this one is just opening it up again. So I'm not that kind of critic who thinks that I'll do something and get it published and I've worked it out. Yeah. I don't read my things, Liam. The things I publish, I don't read. Partly because by the time I get something published, I've gone over it like 5,000 times. I get tired of it, and yes. Also because I've already moved on. So coming back to this project, it's opening and it's just keeping things open for me. So we'll. I still have about 90%. I think I said 90% of the wisdom of these islanders that I need to share, and I'll find another opportunity to share those. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but
but I think that does get at it. I think that this sense of, and it's a great acknowledgement of, I think sometimes we can think that, like, well, a book so short, you can get it right. We can but that it has this irresistible moreness. There's always more that and a different way of thinking. And I think one of the reasons I would commend the book so emphatically to anyone listening is that thing of it does open up, right? Reading these, this array of engagements and experiences with the text, these questions and conversations that emerge in those Bible studies, is going to help unsettle and provoke and push and inform. Going back to your thing at the beginning, it's not this favor given to these communities to, like, hey, get your words in a academic book. It's this gift and favor to those who read it, and can come to Ruth again in a new way and learn more, particularly if we feel like we might have gotten stuck on a wall at a particular point, as we all can when reading a text. And this particular work is designed in order to invite readers and communities to go back to Ruth. These Bible studies are not meant to tell you this is what the text is saying. The Bible studies were written in order to invite, hopefully, like, church groups can read the chapters and look at the text again, and they can decide, oh, those islanders, they're a little foolish in this particular, or they didn't go far enough. I want to hear that. I'd love to hear readers say, oh, you guys didn't go far enough. And then they can look at the text differently. So it's opening and inviting. That's I think that's my drive in this particular project, but also in a lot of my work. I'm hoping people will read, and they might get annoyed or get disgusted, but at least think and think for themselves. I'll be very annoyed if people if people agree that I've got something, or what I say is the only way of looking at it. Yeah, totally. So I'm hoping, people who are listening, if you look at these studies, look at Ruth again, feel free to disagree, feel free to go further. That's what this, and for me, that's what Bible studies, this mode of thinking is different from biblical studies, because biblical studies and the commentary business, they have this illusion that they know what the text is, and then when you read it, they close the conversation. Talanoa is about opening it up.
and disagree with me and whoever else, that's fine, but at least keep it open.
Yeah, I think that's so helpful. And I think because also, like, often with that kind of commentary game, there's a sense of, like, when you do a book proposal, you have to kind of point out where yours differentiates, and often people need to, like, really, like, emphasize that. And so, like, and this is why the 5 people before are totally wrong, and this is why I've finally cracked it. And it's like, I can get why that happens, but you ask for a little more modesty sometimes. It's like, I don't know if you did, but yes, I think one of the things this does, as a totally side point, is it makes you excited to be in, like, because COVID's been what it has been, it makes you excited to be sitting in a room doing a Bible study again. Like, I had that vibe as you were reading it, like, yeah, just getting and talking it out without feeling like the kind of the strictures of that other kind, but just like, let's just see, let's taste and see.
And for me, Bible study, I mean, okay, the way I do Bible studies is a little different from what traditional pastors, but the way I run Bible studies is no different from the way I run a class in a classroom. And part of the joys of teaching for me is at the end of every semester, I'll have like 3 or 4 papers or books that I need to write, just because students, this group of wise people that we call students, that's really unfair, but they have a lot of wisdom, and they may not always realize it, but a half a sentence that they would contribute to the conversation would spark something in my mind that I'll end up chasing in an article. So, and for me, it's just, whether it's a Bible study in the classroom, Bible study out under a tree, or in prison, I treat all of them, I treat all of them in the same way, as opportunities for me to learn, and opportunities for me to have something to work on. So that's some people, some people think that I go to quote unquote teach a Bible study, but I'm pretty much looking for a subject for the next project. And I mean that sincerely. It's not. Yeah.
And I like that. Then that's those questions or those pursuits are emerging organically out of what are people thinking about and wrestling with, rather than like a more top down, like, this is what people should be concerned about.
And every reader is different.
Yes.
Every reader is different, and people, I invite people to see my stupidity, and there'll be times when I'll have to say, oh, that's stupid too. I mean, but it's about learning and being critical of one another. So that's my approach at this, whatever you call it, this work that I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that. And this has been a wonderful conversation. And folks, the book is Losing Ground, Reading Ruth in the Pacific, out with SCM Press. Do check it out, and also just look up and have a look at what else Sione's written or edited, and see if anything there scratches an itch or hits on a topic that you're interested in exploring, and get that, or tell your local library or theological library to get it as well. But Sione, thank you so much for this conversation. Is there anything else you want to draw people's attention to, anything that's coming out, or classes, or anything you want to just promote or mention at this point?
Well, I mean, the main thing for me is just to invite people to open your Bibles and read for yourself. I mean, you can trust, you can believe, but what you read in text, but read for yourself, was the joy of discovery, joy of discovering new meanings or old meanings differently, is available for everyone. So, but I thank you, Liam, for this opportunity. And yes, malo obito.
Thank you so much. And folks, we'll see you all next week. Bye.
All right. Bye.